Michael, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
So, listen, for those who don't know you, give us a little bit of your background and how you came to be the CEO of Oxeia.
So, my name is Michael Wyand. I'm a pathologist by training. I went into the biotech industry and started out in the Genzyme organization as part of Genzyme Transgenics. I've worked predominantly as heads of research and in clinical development. Worked with cancer vaccines, pain products, biosimilars, worked with vaccines of other types, so had quite a wide range of products to be developing. And I started to work with these founders. One of the founders, particularly Amit Munshi, who's been a very successful entrepreneur. I started to work with him, and he brought me into this company, and I was very excited about concussion as an indication.
So, tell us a little bit about how you all kind of figured out there was a potential here to treat concussions with this medicine. And what are some of the early signs that this could actually be a good treatment?
So one of our founders is Dr. Vishal Bansal. He was a trauma surgeon at UCSD at the time. He's now at Scripps. He was very interested in finding better outcomes for his trauma patients who had TBI. And he also was very interested in the gut-brain axis and how things from the gut-brain axis can influence the brain. And he came upon this ghrelin molecule, which had been discovered in 1999 and was being developed by Daiichi Sankyo for non-neurologic indications. And he began to do animal experiments. And he saw very, very promising results in the animal experiments, which led to him filing that data to get intellectual property around the use in mild traumatic brain injury. And then they formed the company.
For those who don't know what ghrelin is, help us understand what this is. Is this a naturally occurring thing in the body? And why do you think it shows the ability to potentially help with concussion issues?
So ghrelin is a natural hormone in the body. It's a small peptide hormone. It's actually in the same group of metabolic controlling hormones as GLP-1s. The GLP-1s stop appetite, and one of ghrelin's main functions is to increase appetite, start appetite. But it binds to receptors in the brain, and its stimulation of appetite is all around maintaining normal energy balance in the brain. So it's responsible for increasing energy in the brain. It's responsible for decreasing reactive oxygen species, decreasing inflammation. It does a bunch of things in the brain. If you look at the concussive injury and you match it up with what concussions do to you, it does all those things. So it's a very good match for concussion.
When you get a concussion, without getting too in the weeds, can you help us understand what happens to the brain? What is the damage that occurs that this is then addressing?
Right, that's a good question. So concussion is defined as a direct or indirect blow to the head, and a direct blow is when something smashes into your skull. An indirect blow is when your body stops suddenly and your head bounces back and forth. We typically call that a whiplash injury. And when the brain is either hit or doing that whiplash injury, the shock waves that go through the brain cause all the cells in our brain to fire. And when they fire, they just drain the battery. So you'll see athletes sometimes, you'll see this on the field. Sometimes you'll see an athlete lying on the field, the fists are clenched, lying on their back, their hands are trembling. They're going through that initial firing of all the cells in your brain. And then when they go to stand up, the battery's drained. And so, okay, nothing's working. We can't think, we can't walk. The problem with that is that our brain consumes 20% of the energy per day that our bodies actually consume or use up, the calories we burn. So it's always running, and it's running everything. So your brain, in a situation where the battery's drained, continues to run. That starts to immediately cause reactive oxygen species, which are toxic to neurons. So if depending on how long that goes on, and it will go on for days to weeks to months potentially, that will result in damage to neurons. It could damage them, it could actually kill them, and that could lead to more longer term effects. But because the brain is bouncing around the skull, there's also a second injury, which is a stretching injury. So the wiring between the cells, which we call axons, that carries all of the information of what we're thinking and what we're doing, When they get stretched, they don't transmit signals properly. So now you have connectivity issues. And ghrelin actually has the properties that I think are the most amazing, is that it causes an outgrowth of dendritic connections, which are the ways in which these wires connect up with other cells.
Mm.
So it has what we call neurogenesis, and that's kind of the holy grail of all central nervous system injury. Like if we could find something that would cause a spinal cord to reconnect, it would stop a catastrophic spinal injury. And I'm not saying ghrelin will do that, but in the brain, it's responsible for healing up those pathways and causing new pathways to form.
I know, I feel like kind of standard of care out there, especially with like mild concussions, is kind of like take it easy, rest, don't go back into a football game or whatever you're doing. And in a few weeks' time, you should be back to normal. Is that the case all the time? If not, what percent of people are dealing with chronic issues ongoing? And is that your applicable market, or is this good for all concussions to just help accelerate getting people back to full health?
Another good question. Concussions were first identified in 1700 BC.
Mm.
Now tack on another 2026 years. We've known about this injury, we've observed this injury, and we yet have still had no therapies developed for it. So we've lived with this in a case where there's been no therapies, and people were told to go home and rest.
Mm-hmm.
And these numbers are difficult because a lot of concussions are not reported. But at the most conservative, 80% of people with concussions within 3 to 5 days will feel pretty good by that time. Mm-hmm. So the rest may have an effect there. That does not mean that their brains have actually recovered. We now know from some of the things of the downstream consequences that even though you might feel better, that injury is not necessarily completely recovered. 20 to 30% of people will have persistent symptoms for weeks to months to years. Mm. And I think because it's always been, rest has been the only thing that we had, and because problems in the brain, they're encased in our heads, we can't see them. It's not like you have your knee blows out and you're limping, you can't walk. It's invisible.
Yeah.
And the brain is like a computer chip. There's no moving parts. A lot of the things that medicine is typically attacked, like heart and blood flow and blood cells and livers and kidneys filtering, those types of things that we've tackled in the past, the brain is a much different thing to tackle. So it's the next frontier.
With what you're developing here, is this a cure? Is this actually making your brain healthy again and taking away the issues that are associated with a concussion, or is this really just relieving the symptoms?
So the symptoms in the neurologic space with diseases like Alzheimer's, ALS, Parkinson's disease, today how we measure them is all by symptoms. There's no blood test. There's no like blood pressure test for Parkinson's. Sure. But if you let your brain continue long term without the energy, and you get cell death, and you get damaged connectivity, your brain's going to have to learn how to live with that. And especially in the case of athletes and military personnel who are exposed multiple times, we know that multiple injuries are not good. They accumulate. So it is something, the ghrelin molecule, because it decreases and increases energy in the brain cells, protects them against the damage going further and actually keeps the ones that are now kind of sick from the damage. It makes them healthy. And it also causes that outgrowth of connectivity, which improves the connections. So it does improve the damage as well as you see the improvement in symptoms.
Is there a world where this application of the ghrelin could actually help with like CTE prevention as well down the road?
It's very possible. There are actually reports, and we have some additional intellectual property around the cognitive effects of some chemotherapies, for instance. And I would love to, once we get our program in concussion going in that phase 2B study, I would love to be able to go into some of these other indications that ghrelin looks like it could be applicable to. There are reports in ALS, there are reports in Parkinson's disease. The kinds of neurodegeneration that occurs in those conditions is very similar to ours. So it's very possible that we could expand into other indications.
Now, you talked about phase 2B trials. There's a lot of folks that are not in kind of the biotech sphere there's kind of three core phases. Well, I guess four, right? Preclinical phase 1, 2, and 3. Talk to me about the focus of phase 2, and what specifically is phase 2A versus 2B. I actually haven't heard of that before.
Right. So Dr. Bonsall, with his work at UCSD, he did the animal experiments that justified the mechanism of action that got us interested in that. At the time that I joined the company, we had just signed a deal with Daiichi Sankyo. As I mentioned earlier, that was discovered by a Japanese investigator in 1999. Daiichi Sankyo started to do research in non-neurologic indications. They actually did 9 clinical studies, 4 phase 1 studies, 4 phase 2 studies, and a phase 3 study. They treated over 300 patients. They did over 70 preclinical studies in animals. We closed a license with them to access that data. And we went to the FDA with that data and said, we are opening up our program in concussion. Do we need to do any additional animal safety, human safety, or any of those early studies? And they said, no, you're good to go. So we went from 0 to 60,
Wow.
pretty quick. And we didn't have to raise the $100 or $200 million that it would take to do all those studies.
Mm-hmm.
So we were able to go directly to phase 2. What's the difference? Phase 1, you're testing for safety in human trials.
Mm-hmm.
And that's usually done in healthy volunteers. In phase 2, you're treating patients. And in phase 2, you have the chance to do multiple trials, large trials, small trials, to understand your patient population better so that you can design what you think is the best phase 3 trial. Because when you get to phase 3 trial, that's what the FDA is going to look at to determine whether they're going to approve it. So we did a phase 2A trial, which is our first trial. I call it a pilot study. Mm-hmm. It's a small study, and we were looking to see whether there was any evidence of a signal. And we saw an 85% responder rate versus a 33% responder rate in the standard of care. And we were also looking about other elements of the design of the trial. Now that we know those things, we now are going to apply it to a larger randomized controlled trial, which is the phase 2B trial, and that will be in 160 patients. And we're designing that trial based on what we know today to be what we believe would be a phase 3 trial. So with that, we have to have discussions with the FDA about going forward in development. And when you get to phase 2B, and we're able to be there because of all this data that we got from Daiichi Sankyo, you're really in the beginning stages of the discussions with the FDA about the approval process. So we're not an early stage. We're an early stage company from the size of we're small biotech companies, early stage from that perspective. But where we are is a later stage clinical company.
In terms of if things go well, continue to go well in your when you launch phase 2B and then phase 3, how long would the process take to get to commercialization from today, do you think?
So what we've started, because we've opened our crowdfund with Start Engine, and we've raised about $1.4 million so far, so we've been able to start our programs. Because there has never been anything submitted to the FDA for concussion, there's been essentially no development. There is no validated endpoint to run trials with, and for trials that are going to be based on reported outcomes, the patient-reported outcomes for symptoms, the FDA has very specific guidance documents on how you have to validate those endpoints. So we brought on a consultant who was at the FDA in the endpoints division, and she wrote the guidance documents, first guidance documents for validation. She's now on our team. We're working with a company who does these validations, and so we are now in the process of validating the endpoint tool that we used in our phase 2A study. And when we get that endpoint tool, that'll take about 6 months. When we get that tool done, we'll have a meeting with the FDA to get their feedback on that tool. And it'd be a huge step for both us and the industry to have a tool that the FDA agreed would be useful as the primary endpoint for a concussion study. And that's when we'll start our phase 2B trial. That will be probably in the early first quarter of 2027. It could be, depending on if we could go faster, it could be at the end of 26, but I think it'll probably be January or so in 2027. We are going to, with our experience from our phase 2A trial, we know about the recruiting rates. We're going to be able to recruit the trial within 12 months. That's our target. And then we will have about 40 to 60 days of follow-up with the patients. For the last patient who comes in at that 12th month, they'll have 40, 50, 60 days in the trial, and that will get us to our top-line data. So we can say in about 18 months, we'll have the final data, and we'll be in discussions about the next steps for the company from a business perspective.
When you go for commercialization, one of the other challenges that a lot of biotechs will face is what line of kind of therapy treatment is this, right? Because payers, they want to try and save as much money as they can. So they'll say, well, go with the standard of care first. And if that really doesn't work, then you could go to this, new drug that's on the market because it's expensive. What do you think about that? Do you think that's how it's going to be, where you're only going to be applicable as like a second or third line defense in concussion protocol? Or do you think this is something that can be, mass used as a first line treatment in all concussions?
I think that the way we structured our trial, we're looking at the persistently symptomatic patient who was out 3 to 5 days and still highly symptomatic. I think we will get immediate traction in that market space. And then we have Jerry Grant, who's a neurosurgeon at Duke, is an advisor to us. We've talked to his team. They like the data we have. And we've talked about ways to go closer and closer to the time of injury. You can't think of an indication like you've sprained your knee or you've ripped your ligament where people say, well, just walk around for a couple of weeks and we'll treat you in a couple of weeks if you're still limping, okay? And it's with what we know about CTE and the other things, and we have to get away from this idea that our brain doesn't deserve the same kind of protection as the rest of our body. So I believe that there will be very early adoption in the acutely injured patient as well. And we may have to do a small study to add on to the data set we have. But and one of the reasons why we attack the persistently symptomatic patient population is because it's easier to run a trial when the patients you're studying are not getting better. So that acute patient with that high rate of feeling a little bit better within 3 to 5 days will probably require some larger studies. But that's our intent, is to have everyone treated and really make a big difference in this indication.
Can you help us understand what the business opportunity is here? How large, your revenues could be on an annual basis from your perspective?
Yeah. So when you look at the epidemiologists of this and you look at the total addressable market, which is what we call that, there are somewhere between twice as many up to, I've seen reports of 6 times the number of reported concussions as actually exist. We've taken the lower numbers, been very conservative. And we said with twice as many concussions not being reported, there's 1.4 million per year in the U.S., just the U.S. And if you go to 6 times, you're up to 4.2 million. But if you take the 1.4 million patients and you take the percent of those that are the persistently symptomatic patient population, you still have a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. And we haven't completed detailed pricing studies with payers at this point, but we've done our calculations based on a total cost of the drug over 14 days of administration, which is what we're doing, to be about $2,000, which we think is very low. And that's how we came up with those $1 billion. So I believe what the position we're likely going to be in with the successful phase 2B data is we will be talking to companies about acquiring this asset. And the biotech industry has, when we grew up in the 90s, big pharma started to change their structures, and they started to look at the biotech industry as a feeder industry for new products. And they've maintained their sales infrastructure, and they can really take something and sell it and make it move. So we'll be talking to those companies. But that's not we don't have to do that. We could continue to, go public, raise additional money, and commercialize it ourselves. But I don't think we're going to get there. I think we're going to have with successful data. Remember, there are no concussion drugs available. There are some companies who are starting things, but they're in very early stages. And I don't think that, it's an amazing market, having never had any drug development in it.
Yeah. So in terms of that being acquired by a larger player, you mentioned the asset. Do you see the entire business being acquired, or do you want to continue to run kind of a pipeline of Grayland type products for other brain damage or whatever it may be?
I think it could go either way. If we start some of those earlier trials I talked about, and run a phase 2A trial in Alzheimer's, in ALS or in Parkinson's disease or in other types of cognitive deficits. That could be a pipeline that would increase the value to the company, or we could go on our own, do that development. We could have one of the indications acquired. What I'm very focused on is getting a solid return for our investors.
Mm-hmm.
And so that'll be a major driver in the direction that we go. If we can hand this asset off and have it be a very successful investment for our investors, we can hand it off to a big pharma company. I would do that every day.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I want to give you the last word here. For those investors who are listening to this, they're on the line, but they're not there yet. What do you want them to know?
I want them to know that early stage company, but we're a late stage from a clinical development perspective. We're very focused on our investors and thinking about their ability to be successful in this company. Our valuation is at $50 million, which is an extremely different valuation than you've typically seen for companies that are in late stage clinical development. So it's a tremendous opportunity for investors. And I also want them to see the mission that we've been on. We've been doing this as pioneers, facing a lot of questions about, well, can it be done? Why hasn't it been done before? And we told them, we don't know the answers to those necessarily specifically, but we're doing it. And we really enjoy people who get on board and want to be part of a historic development program that could be the first treatment for such an important disease. And when I talk to people, I gave a talk to the New Bedford Science Cafe in New Bedford, Mass. I had trouble getting out of the venue because everybody they were telling me stories about their kids and their parents and other people in their family who've had concussion. The unmet medical need is huge. So I think this is something that not only does it look like it can be a good investment opportunity, but it's an opportunity to do something really good that hasn't been done before.